My wife left for Lisbon with her boyfriend and didn't even say goodbye in person. She sent a message saying she drained our savings and left me to raise our son alone. I didn't argue. I looked at my child's small fingers in mine and replied calmly. Months later, when she touched down and checked her account, the silence on her end told me everything was about to change. Before I tell you how that silence came to exist, do me one small favor, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who might need them more than they know. I was standing in the daycare parking lot on Pine Hollow Drive when my phone buzzed. Bend, Oregon was wrapped in that gray, drizzly kind of afternoon that smells like wet asphalt and pine needles. The kind of weather that makes everything feel slower, heavier. I'd just shut off the engine of my aging Subaru when I read the message. I'm leaving for Lisbon with my boyfriend. I emptied our savings. You'll figure it out. No emojis. No explanation. No goodbye. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I'd misread it. Like my brain refused to process the words in the order they were written. Then the daycare door swung open, and my 4-year-old son, Eli, came running toward me with a paper crown sliding off his head and paint on his sleeves. He grabbed my hand without looking up, trusting it would always be there. That's when the panic tried to take over. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and for a moment I couldn't hear the rain anymore. I stared at Eli's fingers wrapped around mine, small and warm, and I realized something important in that instant. Whatever just happened between adults, this little hand still expected the world to stay solid. So I swallowed everything else. I typed back 2 words. Good to know. I didn't call Sophia. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg her to think about Eli. I buckled him into his car seat, closed the door carefully, and stood there a moment longer than necessary, letting the rain soak the shoulders of my jacket like some kind of grounding ritual. Is Mom making dinner? Eli asked as I pulled onto the road. We'll figure dinner out, I said, keeping my voice steady. How about pancakes tonight? He cheered like I'd just promised Disneyland. The house on Pine Hollow Drive felt different the moment we walked in. Too quiet. Too empty. Sophia's shoes were gone from the entryway. Her coat was missing from the hook. On the kitchen counter, her coffee mug was gone, but the ring it always left behind was still there, pale and accusing. I put Eli at the table with crayons and construction paper and opened my banking app. 0. Not low. Not almost gone. 0. Checking had a handful of dollars. Savings, which we'd been building for years, was wiped clean. Rent was due in 10 days. I sat down at the kitchen table and forced myself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale like I used to during panic attacks years ago, back when therapy taught me that control starts with breath. I grabbed a legal pad and wrote a list titled What I Can Control. Feed Eli. Keep routine normal. Call work. Do not break down in front of him. Everything else could wait. That evening, after pancakes and a cartoon and brushing teeth, Eli fell asleep clutching his stuffed bear. I stood in the doorway watching his chest rise and fall, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into my bones. I wasn't just a husband who'd been abandoned. I was now the only parent in the house. When I finally sat back down at the table, I noticed the mail I'd ignored all week. Bills. Grocery flyers. And one thick envelope I didn't recognize. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. Sophia hadn't blocked me. She hadn't sent anything else either. It was like she dropped a bomb and walked away before hearing the echo. As the night deepened, something else started to bother me. Not just that she left, but how prepared it felt. The drained savings. The clean disappearance of her belongings. The timing. This hadn't been impulsive. I remembered the late-night calls she'd been taking for months, whispering in the bedroom while I packed Eli's lunch for the next day. The way she'd talked about opportunities abroad like they were abstract dreams, not real exits. Her mother, Margaret Laurent, had always looked at me like I was temporary, like I was a placeholder until something better arrived. And then there was Luca Moretti. The colleague she'd mentioned once too casually at a dinner party. The man whose name had popped up on her phone more than once, always followed by a quick screen lock and a forced smile. I opened the thick envelope at last. Inside was a copy of a loan agreement from years earlier, when we'd borrowed money from Margaret to renovate the house. My signature was there. So was Sophia's. And beneath it, a clause I didn't remember agreeing to, something about calling the loan due in the event of separation. My stomach dropped. I realized then that this wasn't just abandonment. It was strategy. And somewhere between the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping the windows, I understood that Sophia hadn't just left me to raise our son alone. She had assumed I would crumble quietly, clean up the mess, and disappear from the story. She was wrong. I closed the envelope, turned off the lights, and went to bed knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment everything started moving in a direction she never planned for. The next morning arrived without mercy. Eli woke before the alarm, padding into the kitchen with his stuffed bear dragging behind him, asking if we could have pancakes again. I smiled, said maybe on the weekend, and poured cereal like nothing in the world had shifted off its axis. That became the pattern, normal on the surface, controlled chaos underneath. After daycare drop-off, I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before turning the key. My phone felt heavier than it should have. I opened the banking app again, not because I expected the numbers to change, but because part of me still hoped the night before had been a glitch. It wasn't. I drove straight to work, what was left of it. My small interior design studio in Bend had always been a balancing act. I'd traded bigger contracts for flexible hours after Eli was born. Sophia used to say she admired that about me. Now, it felt like a weakness she'd already calculated into her exit. By noon, I'd emailed 3 clients asking for accelerated payments, postponed a supplier order, and canceled a weekend trip I'd promised myself for months. Survival mode is efficient like that. It cuts without asking what you'll miss. When I picked Eli up that afternoon, June, the neighbor who sometimes watched him when I ran late, lingered at the gate. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. I nodded too fast. "Yeah. Just one of those weeks." She didn't push. People rarely do. That night, after Eli was asleep, I opened the thick envelope again and read the loan clause more carefully. The language was clean, clinical, and unmistakable. If Margaret chose to enforce it, she could demand full repayment immediately. I checked the date. The clause had been added 3 months ago. 3 months. That was when Sophia started taking weekend work retreats. When her phone password changed. When she stopped asking how my day was and started telling me how busy hers would be. I took photos of everything, every page, every signature, and saved them to a cloud folder under a name that meant nothing. Then I called Daniel Brooks. Daniel picked up on the second ring. "Nate," he said. "What's wrong?" I told him everything. Slowly. Carefully. I stuck to facts and dates, because emotion muddies water and Daniel had always been the kind of lawyer who hated murky things. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Okay," he said finally. "First, do not confront her. Second, document everything. Third, send me copies of whatever you have." "What about Eli?" I asked. "That's why we're moving fast," he said. "Anyone who empties accounts and leaves the country has already crossed lines." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch listening to the house creak and wondered how someone could dismantle a life so quietly. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a message sent between daycare pickup and dinner. 2 days later, Sophia emailed me. One sentence. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." No apology. No explanation. I didn't reply. Instead, I noticed something else. Small transfers I hadn't questioned before, hundreds here, thousands there, spread over weeks, routed to an account labeled only ML Consulting. The initials didn't need much decoding. Margaret Loran. I sent everything to Daniel. His response came an hour later. "This isn't just divorce prep," he wrote. "This looks coordinated." That was the word that stuck. Coordinated. I started keeping a log. Times. Messages. Bank movements. I wrote everything down like my life had become evidence, because in a way, it had. A week later, Sophia's social media lit up. Lisbon sunsets. Cafe tables. A man's hand in one photo, Luca's, though his face stayed carefully out of frame. Comments poured in from people who had once toasted our wedding. "So brave. New beginnings. You deserve happiness." I closed the app and went back to folding Eli's laundry. The call came 3 days after that. Unknown number. International code. I answered. "Nathan," Sophia said. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. "We need to talk." "No," I said calmly. "We don't." She exhaled sharply. "You're being difficult." "I'm being a parent." Silence stretched between us. "You'll get money," she said finally. "Once things settle." I almost laughed. "You already settled them." She hung up. That night, Daniel called me with a tone I hadn't heard before, focused, sharp. "I found something," he said. "A shell company registered in your name. You're listed as the owner." My blood went cold. "I didn't register anything." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." The company had received deposits routed through Margaret's foundation, then funneled overseas, into accounts connected to Sophia's new employer in Lisbon. On paper, it looked like I was moving money abroad. On paper, I looked guilty. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the screen while Eli colored dinosaurs beside me, humming to himself, blissfully unaware that his entire future was being written in spreadsheets. "This can be untangled," Daniel said. "But we need proof of intent." How? I asked. By letting them think you don't know yet. That was the hardest part. I went on with life. Work. Daycare. Grocery runs. I replied politely to Sophia's occasional logistical emails. I never mentioned money. Never mentioned Lisbon. Never mentioned Luca. Then, one night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar name. Luca. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. We need to talk. I didn't sign up for this. I called Daniel immediately. Tell him to send everything, Daniel said. And do not promise him anything. I replied to Luca with one line. If you have something to say, put it in writing. What he sent back over the next hour changed everything. Emails. Screenshots. Wire confirmations. A voice note, Margaret's voice, unmistakable, cool and deliberate. Once Nathan is flagged, custody will be easier, she said in the recording. We just need enough movement to raise questions. I felt sick. Daniel didn't. This, he said quietly, is exactly what we needed. By the time Eli fell asleep that night, I understood something I hadn't before. Sophia hadn't just left with her boyfriend. She'd left me holding a trap. And now, for the first time since the daycare parking lot, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ready. Because when she touched down in Lisbon and finally opened her bank app, she wasn't going to find freedom waiting. She was going to find consequences already in motion. By the time Sophia realized something was wrong, I was already 3 steps ahead. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't even acknowledge it out loud. I just kept moving. The morning after Luca sent the files, I dropped Eli at daycare like always, waved to June across the fence, and drove straight to Daniel's office in Portland. The sky was clear in that brittle, early spring way that makes everything look sharper than it feels. Daniel had printed everything. Stacks of paper sat on the table like bricks, emails, wire confirmations, corporate filings, transcripts of messages I didn't know existed until 2 days earlier. My name appeared everywhere, typed cleanly at the top of documents I had never seen, never signed, never authorized. This is what they planned, Daniel said, tapping one page. Paint you as unstable. Then paint you as financially reckless. Then take the child. I swallowed. And Sophia? She agreed to it, he said gently. Maybe she told herself it was temporary. Maybe she told herself it was for Eli. But yes, she agreed. Hearing it framed that way hurt more than the betrayal itself. It meant this hadn't just been momentum. It had been choice. Daniel slid another document toward me. We're filing an emergency motion to freeze all accounts tied to the Shell Company and Margaret's Foundation. We're also filing for temporary sole custody. I nodded. Do it. That afternoon, while I was back in Bend assembling a flat-pack bookshelf with Eli, my phone buzzed. Sophia again. Why can't I access my account? I didn't answer. 5 minutes later. Nathan. This isn't funny. I still didn't answer. The third message came faster, less polished. Did you do something? I put my phone face down on the counter and handed Eli his favorite screwdriver, the plastic one that made him feel helpful. His world was small and safe and filled with screws that didn't actually turn anything, and I was determined to keep it that way. By nightfall, Daniel texted me one sentence. Accounts frozen. Court date set. I stared at the words longer than necessary, letting them sink in. That night, Sophia called from a different number. I answered this time. What did you do? She demanded, skipping pleasantries entirely. I protected our son, I said. You can't just freeze money, she snapped. That's not how this works. It is when the court thinks it might be stolen, I replied. She went quiet. Then her voice softened in a way that once would have pulled me in. Nathan, this is my mother. She pushed too far. You know how she is. I closed my eyes. You let her. I didn't think. That's the problem, I cut in. You thought you'd already won. Her breath hitched. If you do this, you'll ruin everything. No, I said calmly. I'm stopping you from ruining Eli. She hung up. The custody hearing was set for 9 days later. 9 days of living under a microscope. Daniel warned me what to expect. Social worker visits. Character assessments. A deep dive into my past therapy records, my income fluctuations, my parenting routines. Anything they could use, they would try. So I prepared. I reorganized the house. Printed Eli's school records. Logged every pickup, every meal, every bedtime routine. I asked June if she'd be willing to speak on my behalf. She agreed without hesitation. He's the most stable kid on the block, she said. That didn't happen by accident. 3 days before the hearing, an email arrived from Margaret Lawrence's attorney. It was polite. Polished. Menacing in its restraint. They suggested mediation. Quiet resolution. Avoiding unnecessary damage. Daniel read it and smiled thinly. That means they're scared, he said. The night before the hearing, Sophia sent one final message. Please don't humiliate me in court. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I'm not interested in humiliating you. I'm interested in the truth. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake listening to Eli breathe, thinking about how close I'd come to losing him without ever knowing there was a fight happening at all. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Clean lines. Hard benches. No room for messiness. Sophia sat across the aisle, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Margaret sat beside her, perfectly composed, hands folded like she was attending a charity luncheon instead of a custody hearing. When it was Daniel's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He let the documents speak. He showed the shell company. The forged authority. The recorded voice note where Margaret said my name like an obstacle to be removed. The wire trails that funneled money out of the country under my identity. The judge listened. Asked questions. Took notes. Then Margaret's attorney stood. He spoke about concern. About instability. About my documented mental health history. Daniel stood again. Your Honor, he said evenly, my client sought treatment years ago after the birth of his child. He complied fully. He stabilized. He became the sole caregiver when the mother left the country. If seeking help disqualifies someone from parenthood, then we are all in trouble. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. Then she spoke. Temporary sole custody is granted to the father. All frozen assets remain under court supervision. The mother is to return to the country if she wishes to contest further. Sophia's shoulders sagged. Margaret didn't move. Outside the courthouse, Sophia approached me, her voice trembling now, stripped of rehearsals. You didn't have to do all this, she said. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who had mistaken distance for escape. You left our son, I said quietly. Everything after that was consequence. She didn't reply. Weeks passed. Sophia stayed in Lisbon. Margaret's accounts remained locked. Investigations unfolded slowly, methodically, like a tide pulling truth to shore. Life settled into a new rhythm. Eli started asking fewer questions about when Mom was coming home. He started calling our evenings our time. Pancakes became a Saturday tradition. We built a bookshelf together and filled it with library books and toy dinosaurs. One afternoon, months later, my phone buzzed. Sophia again. I'm coming back. We need to talk. I stared at the message, then at Eli, sprawled on the floor building a tower with reckless confidence. I typed one line. We'll talk when the court says it's appropriate. When she landed back in the country, she didn't walk into the life she'd left behind. She walked into a reality that no longer bent around her absence. And she was finally starting to understand that some doors don't slam shut. They close quietly. And lock. By the time Sophia returned, the house no longer felt like something she could step back into. It wasn't dramatic. No locks changed. No furniture moved. But the air itself had shifted. The rhythm of our days had rewritten itself without her, and every corner of the house carried that quiet truth. She didn't come straight to me. She went to her mother first. I heard about it from Daniel. They met this morning, he said. Margaret is furious. Not scared, furious. That's worse. I was in the kitchen, rinsing blueberries for Eli, watching him line up toy cars along the counter like they were guarding the fruit. I thanked Daniel and hung up, then crouched to Eli's level. Big day at school, I said lightly. He nodded, serious. I'm bringing my dinosaur book. June says teachers like books. They do, I smiled. Very much. After I dropped him off, I drove home slowly, not because I was stalling, but because I finally could. For months, every movement had felt like it was happening under a timer. Now, the clock had stopped chasing me. That afternoon, Sophia finally called. I'm back, she said. I know. Silence stretched between us. Can I see Eli? Not without the court's approval, I replied. Come. Even. You know that. Her breath shook. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm protecting him. She exhaled sharply, like she was biting back something louder. I made mistakes. Yes. That's it, she snapped. Just yes? Yes, I repeated. You didn't forget milk at the store. You didn't miss a birthday. You left the country, drained our savings, and helped your mother build a paper trail to take our son away from me. Her voice dropped. I didn't think it would go that far. That's the problem, I said. You thought it wouldn't reach you. She hung up without another word. 2 days later, a court-appointed evaluator came to the house. She was polite, professional, neutral in the way only someone trained to see everything without reacting can be. She asked Eli questions while he colored. She watched how he moved through the space. How he looked at me when he spoke. At one point, she asked him, "Who makes breakfast?" He didn't hesitate. Daddy. Sometimes pancakes. Sometimes the round eggs. Do you feel safe here? She asked. He nodded. Yes. Daddy fixes things. She wrote that down. When she left, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the indentation where Eli curled up every evening to watch cartoons. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath until that moment. Margaret didn't go quietly. Her attorneys filed motions. Appeals. Objections. She tried to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, a paperwork issue, a family disagreement blown out of proportion. Daniel dismantled each attempt methodically. She keeps assuming money will scare someone, he told me. She hasn't figured out that this judge doesn't scare easily. Meanwhile, rumors started circulating. At the playground, one parent asked gently if everything was okay. Another avoided eye contact altogether. Someone had talked. I didn't need to ask who. I stopped caring. June noticed first. They're whispering, she said one evening over the fence. You okay? I am, I said honestly. They can whisper. She nodded. Good. Because the kids see who shows up. The rest is noise. The next hearing came faster than expected. Sophia was there this time, sitting stiffly beside her attorney. Margaret sat behind her, posture rigid, lips pressed thin. I didn't look at either of them. Daniel presented the evaluator's report. Eli's school records. Testimony from caregivers. Evidence of Sophia's continued absence since returning to the country. Sophia's attorney argued remorse. Claimed manipulation by Margaret. Promised change. The judge listened. Then she turned to Sophia directly. You left your child, she said plainly. And when you returned, you did not immediately attempt reunification through appropriate legal channels. Instead, your family attempted financial pressure. Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it again. The judge continued. Supervised visitation will be considered after 6 months of demonstrated stability and compliance. Margaret stiffened. This is outrageous, she said sharply. The judge looked at her for the first time. You are not a party to this custody, she said coolly. And your continued interference has been noted. Margaret said nothing after that. Outside the courthouse, Sophia tried to approach me again. I didn't know how to come back, she said quietly. I stopped and faced her. You don't come back by undoing what you did, I said. You come back by accepting what you broke. Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. That night, Eli asked a question I'd been expecting. Is Mommy mad at you? I sat beside him on the bed, smoothing his hair. No, buddy. Mommy is just figuring some things out. Will she come here? Not right now, I said gently. But she loves you. He thought about that, then nodded. Okay. And just like that, the question passed. Weeks turned into months. Margaret's foundation quietly dissolved under investigation. Sponsors pulled out. Board members resigned. Headlines appeared briefly, then moved on to the next scandal. Sophia started therapy, according to her attorney. She sent short, careful messages. Never about money. Never about blame. Always about Eli. I read them. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because the court had taught me something vital. Silence, used correctly, is not cruelty. It's structure. One evening, as I tucked Eli in, he wrapped his arms around my neck and whispered, You stayed. Yes, I said, my throat tightening. I stayed. After he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet and warm and whole in a way I'd never known it could be. Sophia would always be part of our story. But she was no longer the one writing it. And for the first time since that text message shattered my world, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was standing on solid ground, watching a future unfold that I had built, piece by piece, with my own hands. By the time everything finally settled, I understood something I hadn't known when Sophia first sent that message from an ocean away. The hardest part wasn't being left. It was realizing how quietly someone can decide you no longer matter, and how powerful it is to survive that decision without becoming bitter. Months passed. Not the dramatic kind where every day feels like a battle, but the slow, ordinary kind that rebuilds you without asking permission. Eli grew taller. His shoes wore out faster than I expected. He learned how to zip his jacket on his own and insisted on doing it himself, even when it took forever. I stopped rushing him. Life had taught me patience whether I wanted it or not. Sophia followed the court's rules carefully. Therapy appointments. Parenting classes. Clean reports. No late-night messages. No emotional pressure. Just quiet compliance. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if that discipline was genuine or simply learned. Margaret disappeared from the picture almost entirely. After the investigation into her finances became public, the social circles she once dominated grew distant. Invitations dried up. Board seats vanished. Money can insulate you from consequences, but only for so long. Daniel called me one afternoon with an update. She's trying to negotiate, he said. Margaret wants reduced penalties in exchange for cooperation. Does that affect us? I asked. No, he replied. But it confirms something. What's that? She never expected resistance. She expected control. I hung up and looked at Eli playing on the living room floor, lining up wooden animals in careful rows. Control was the one thing I refused to hand over. The supervised visit happened on a Tuesday. Neutral room. Soft colors. A woman with a clipboard watching carefully but pretending not to. Sophia walked in slowly, like she was afraid the floor might disappear beneath her. Eli recognized her instantly. He froze. Sophia stopped too. Neither of them moved for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Then Eli looked at me. I nodded. That was all he needed. He walked toward her, not running, not smiling, but not afraid either. She knelt and opened her arms carefully, like someone approaching a skittish animal. Hi, she said. Hi, he replied. She cried. Quietly. He didn't. He hugged her for exactly as long as he wanted, then stepped back and started talking about dinosaurs like nothing monumental had just happened. I watched closely. Children forgive differently than adults. Not through words, but through boundaries. The visits continued. Short. Structured. Predictable. Eli adjusted on his own terms, and I respected that. Sophia never once asked for sympathy. She didn't deserve points for that, but she earned my acknowledgement. One evening, after a visit, Eli asked me something unexpected. Mommy looks tired, he said. Yes, I answered. Are you tired too? I thought about it. No, I said finally. Not anymore. That was when I realized the weight I'd been carrying wasn't grief. It was fear. Fear of losing my child. Fear of being erased. Fear of being judged by someone else's version of my life. And that fear was gone. The final custody hearing arrived quietly. No press. No theatrics. Just paperwork, testimony, and decisions. Sophia was granted limited, increasing visitation with clear conditions. Full custody remained with me. When the judge finished reading the ruling, she looked directly at Sophia. Parenthood is not about entitlement, she said. It is about presence. Sophia nodded, tears streaking her face. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Finished fighting. Finished proving. Finished surviving. Outside the courthouse, Sophia stopped me one last time. I'm sorry, she said. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just honestly. I know, I replied. She waited, as if expecting more. There are some things sorry doesn't fix, I added. But it does matter that you said it. She nodded, accepting that was all she would get. Life moved forward. Eli started kindergarten. I started taking on more design work again, selective projects, ones that didn't steal time from the life I'd built. Our house felt lived in, not staged. Real. One night, after Eli fell asleep, I found the old wedding photo strip tucked into a drawer. I stared at it for a long time. Then I threw it away. Not because I hated who we'd been, but because I no longer needed proof of what I'd lost. Sophia never returned to Lisbon. Her boyfriend faded from the story without drama or explanation. Some relationships don't end, they dissolve. Margaret sent one letter. I never opened it. Some doors don't deserve closure. On Eli's 7th birthday, he wrapped his arms around my waist and said, "You're my safe place." I had to turn away for a moment so he wouldn't see my face. Because that, more than money, more than court victories, more than silence across an ocean, was everything. I didn't win by taking something from her. I won by keeping what mattered. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe standing in your own quiet storm, wondering how you'll survive being left behind, hear this. You don't survive by shouting. You survive by staying. By building. By choosing presence over pride. Before you go, do me one last favor. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you know, and stories like this only travel as far as people are willing to listen. Thank you for listening to mine.